And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Tuesday, November 9th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories viewed here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com. So here we go for today's news roundup from around Indian Country. Laura Robinson, an outspoken advocate for First Nations access to performance-level sports facilities, is the seventh winner of the Debwewin Citation for Excellence in Reporting on First Nations Issues. Robinson was accredited to report on the Vancouver Winter Olympic Games for the Anishinaabeg News, published by the Union of Ontario Indians for the 40-member communities of the Anishinaabeg Nation. She produced articles before, during, and after the Olympics about Anishinaabeg and First Nations participants in games-related cultural activities, and a number of stories and columns that question the lack of even a single Aboriginal member of the Canadian team. Grand Council Chief Patrick Mudubby presented the award during a special fall assembly of the Anishinaabeg Nation. In a surprise move in the Aquash murder case on November 8th, Thelma Rios pled guilty to being an accessory to the 1975 kidnapping of American Indian Movement activist Annie Mae Pictou Aquash, 3 weeks before she was scheduled to go on trial on charges related to Aquash's murder. Rios, 65, admitted to the Seventh Circuit Judge Jack Delaney that she had relayed a message in December 1975 to fellow AIM members in Colorado, including AIM member Angie Begay, telling them that Aquash, then 30, was to be brought from Denver to Rapid City, initiating her kidnapping. Rios also admitted that she had provided her Rapid City apartment for purposes related to Annie Mae. When Delaney then asked Rios if she had ever heard discussions over whether Aquash, whom some in AIM believed was a government informer, should be off, Rios replied, "Yes, sir." Last fall, Rios was charged with premeditated murder and felony murder committed during a kidnapping for her alleged role in the events leading up to Aquash's execution in December of 1975. John Graham, 54, is still scheduled to go on trial November 29th on charges of premeditated murder, felony murder committed during a kidnapping, and felony murder related to rape. Rios was sentenced the maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. The sentence was suspended with the exception of 90 days with credit given for time already served after Rios was arrested in September of 2009. She will be on probation for 5 years. Rios's guilty plea means prosecutors can subpoena her to testify at Graham's upcoming trial. If convicted, he would face life in prison. Members and attorneys for the American Indian Movement, like Bruce Ellison of Rapid City, have stated in the past that even if an Indian killed Aquash, they believe the FBI set it up. And today we go to Shoshone Bannock tribal member Mark Trahant on the road in Washington, D.C., where he brings us this report. Mark Trahant, you're in Washington, D.C. today. Can you give us a little bit of hint about what's going on up at the Hill or wherever you're at in that atmosphere?
Well, there are coming battles, I'm afraid. If you'll remember, one of the things that I mentioned early on about the Indian Health Care Improvement Act was how it was folded into the larger health care reform bill.
Right.
Well,
an independent chunk which
right.
authorized programs but did not provide a budget for them.
Exactly. There's two tracks for every piece of legislation: appropriations and authorization. And this was just an authorization. So now with the Republicans coming to town, there's concern about the appropriation and what they're going to be able to get to actually execute and implement some of the ideas in the Indian Health Care Improvement Act.
In other words, Indian Health Service locally could say, well, you have a right to an x-ray because of the treaty. We have the x-ray machine, but there is no money authorized for the person to take the x-ray and pay for it.
Well, I think within Indian Health Service, you'll still be able to do pretty much everything. It's when you get into contract health care that it'll be more complicated. Okay. And where it really gets complicated is with Medicaid, because you have these state governments that are going to be fighting expansion. The current law does call for expansion. It opens it up to a new funding source for Indian Health Service that is going to be a bone of contention with all of the states, and particularly with so many new Republican governors.
Tell me a little bit about the difference between regular services and contract health. Are you talking about someone who needs a special track because, for example, they have a herniated disc back here? They may need some long-term assistance and actually an operation, and they're saying, we don't have the money to do those kinds of things.
One way to think about it is that IHS primarily does direct services. And if it's direct services, they control it. But if they act like an insurance company and want to send you somewhere else, that often is contract health care.
Okay. I think a lot of people don't always understand that because there's not only a fiscal system. Rich Heap Films just put out a movie called Don't Get Sick After June 23rd, which means not only does contract health run out, but sometimes services in-house and in-house services run out as well. On an annual basis, and they've been saying the cutoff date is like June 23rd out of the fiscal year.
Yeah, I actually think that's a narrative we need to change. I mean, it's true that that does happen, but it's not nearly as pronounced as the narrative. And I think it opens it up to the Republicans who say the Indian Health Service is a disaster. Contract health is an issue, and there needs to be more money in contract health, but rarely does direct services run out of money.
Indeed. Where is the battle beginning up there? The House is going now. You got a lame duck session, and then you have a House coming up in January, which is dominated by Republicans. You still have the Democrats in control of the Senate. You still have a Democratic president. Where does this battle evolve, and what are we facing? What are the dynamics Indian country is facing?
Well, and I would add to your scenario, we have a Republican Supreme Court. So it really is a 50-50 situation. Already folks are lined up. I think the lame duck session is going to be very difficult to get things through. It's very contentious already, and it'll be interesting to see whether there can get any kind of agreement. Remember, in the Senate, you need a supermajority, 60 votes, and that's just a very high hurdle at this time. The House are already starting to line up the new leaders, and I think for Indian Affairs, it's really interesting. The new chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee is Doc Hastings from Washington State. He's not been particularly a good friend of tribes. He's fought tribes on NAGPRA and some of the other issues. Another person who's going to be a player is a Representative Mike Simpson, who happens to be the congressman that represents Fort Hall from Blackfoot, Idaho. He will be chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Interior, and so it'll be the money for both IHS and BIA. And he's a dentist. Maybe that'll help. At least he has a somewhat medical background.
It just makes me want to smile, with a full mouth of teeth. Is the battle over Indian health care and services, IHS, going to be a mirror of the battles in education, law enforcement, and those other agencies in D.C. in regards to Native American funding, tribal funding in the next 2 or 3 years?
I think it's going to be worse, and I'll tell you why. I think we're going to get caught up in the whole health care reform debate. And the Republicans have vowed to defund as much as possible, and an easy target is Indian Health Service, and particularly the new money that's coming from the Indian Health Care Improvement Act. I think we need to start building the case with good data and good narratives about what this will do and how it will affect real people.
Any of the Republicans on that side care at all about the treaty obligation notion that some people are going to propose? These were promised in the treaties for the cession of lands and minerals and other events. Does that carry any weight at all in Washington, D.C. nowadays? Contractual obligations.
It does with particularly the older line Republicans. One person who will be an advocate on the Republican side is Representative Tom Cole from Oklahoma, who's a member of one of the 5 civilized tribes. So you'll have some of that. But the Tea Partiers, that doesn't carry any weight at all. I mean, they are just wanting to cut spending wherever they can, regardless of the U.S. application. And I'll give you an example beyond Indian Affairs that is perhaps the most serious. Is Congress must every few years increase the debt ceiling, and it's just a very simple vote. But they're wanting to vote it down, which would mean that the U.S. would renege on all of the bonds it has with every foreign entity that lends us money. That could have huge implications around the world, but it's just, who cares?
Didn't the last time they tried not refunding the deficit, there was some agencies that actually began getting ready to close down too in regards to that? Could we see
That did in Gingrich, and it very well could happen again. But this bond issue is worse because it's people who've lent us money would say, well, we're not going to pay you back on time. And you can imagine how that would go if you tried to do that with your bank.
Well, that's I don't know what to think about all this. Like I says, after the scenario and the color of the country changed on Tuesday, I thought we got something going here. It'll be interesting to see how the country survives this. Now, in Indian country, we're just going to hunker down, aren't we, like we typically do, and a lot of Native Americans are not even going to notice all this going on.
I think this time they'll notice. They'll notice some of the service cuts. I think that'll be real. But I think you're right. There'll be a lot of hunkering down. One of the things that I haven't had a chance to do yet that I plan to is to actually go through and look at the lack of voting in Indian country. I just did a very quick look and some precincts around the country, and it appears to me that voting was down 30, 50, 60% in many cases. So that, I think, shows the lack of interest in what's going on in the broader society, and we'll get the implications later.
I think that downturn is much more common in the midterm elections. I think as the Native community has got involved in voting, you see them going to the big elections with the presidential elections, but the midterm elections have not become a crucial element. This was the first time that the elections actually turned out 15 or more Native American Democratic legislators. They weren't replaced by Republican Native Americans. They were just replaced by Republicans. Right. One of the more devastating elections for Native politicians. I wouldn't mind seeing more Native Americans on the Republican ticket in those places where they deserve to represent communities at large, just not the Native communities with them. To me, this was an eye-opener for the Native community to actually be able to see that when they did not turn out, the dynamics of the election changed fairly dramatically, and the fact that their swing vote could have been that much more powerful in the face of what generally is a 50% turnout during the midterm elections?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a case we need to make between now and the next midterm election. And hopefully it'll start by getting people inspired in the next presidential election.
How many days to the next election? 764 days or something like that. No.
Yeah, I don't have one of those clocks, so I can't help you.
You ever think about dipping your toe into the run of politics?
It's too much fun being someone commenting on politics. Why would I want to get my toe dirty?
Okay. How long are you in D.C. and what else are you on a mission for? Anything else in particular?
Oh, I gave a speech today at the Interior Department about primarily about my book, but about some other things. So a great warm reception. I had a blast and headed back to Idaho in the morning.
Name of your book is, and where can we get more information about that in your regular columns?
Sure, Last Great Battle of the Indian Wars, and it's easily found at www.marktrahant.com.
Mark, we look forward for you going back to D.C. after January 1st when everything turns red there and your bow tie will be back in. Look at what happened to that bow tie?
It's been many years.
I'll see you again soon, Mark. Thanks
Take
for
care.
joining with us. And don't forget the live broadcast starting tomorrow, the Harmony Cafe concert in Green Bay, Wisconsin, LCO Vets Powwow on Thursday, and Friday, the Native American Music Awards. All that and more on IndianCountryTV.com.